He walked through the ruins with the weight of too many memories on his shoulders. Sergeant Logan Bennett, one of the most trusted marksmen in the British 6th Airborne Division, had seen more than most ever should. The streets of Caen were quiet that morning. Too quiet. Smoke curled from collapsed homes. Families wandered without direction. And just when he thought he could take a breath before the next mission, he saw her. Kneeling by the rubble, holding the hands of two little girls. Covered in dust, eyes full of silence, Olivia Moreau, the girl he once loved in a peaceful corner of Brittany, now a ghost from a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. This is not a story of battles. It's a story of what war leaves behind, of love, of choices, and of a single moment that changed everything. Welcome to the channel. If you believe these stories should never be forgotten, join us. Subscribe now and turn on the notifications to help keep every memory and every story alive. Without further delay, let's get straight to the point. The sky was a dull grey, heavy with smoke and silence. Snowflakes fell slowly, mixing with the ash that blanketed what was once a peaceful French village. Logan moved through the rubble with quiet steps, his boots crunching on broken bricks and scattered memories. He had seen towns like this before, homes torn open like old letters, walls burned, black, streets empty except for shadows. But this time was different. Near the ruins of a bakery, he spotted movement, a figure curled up beside a collapsed wall, trying to stay hidden. Logan raised his rifle instinctively, then froze. It was a young woman. Her clothes were worn thin, her face pale, but her eyes, sharp, defiant, locked onto his. Beside her, two small girls clung to her coat, their cheeks red from the cold, their eyes swollen from tears. They hadn't eaten in days. Logan approached, slowly, lowering his weapon. The woman held her daughters close, trying to shield them with trembling arms. "We're fine," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but Logan could see the truth. They weren't fine, not even close. He knelt beside them without hesitation. His uniform was torn, his hands stained with soot and grime, but in that moment, he wasn't a soldier. He was simply a man looking at suffering he couldn't ignore. "You don't have to say anything," he told her gently. "You've done enough just keeping them safe." Her name was Olivia. The girls were Eloise and Margot. Logan didn't wait for permission. He turned to the two men following behind and gave a firm order. "We're taking them back with us. Now." The walk to the outpost was quiet. The wind howled through the trees as they crossed what was left of the village. Olivia tried to carry both girls, but Logan insisted on holding one. The little one, Margot, clung to his neck, too tired to cry. The camp wasn't much, just a few canvas tents hidden behind the British line, but it was warm and it had food. The men from Logan's unit looked up, puzzled at first. A woman? Children? But when they saw their sergeant's face, they said nothing. Some offered blankets, others made space by the fire. The silence said enough. They understood. That night, Logan sat outside one of the tents, staring into the flames. Olivia approached, her shoulders wrapped in a wool coat too big for her frame. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. He didn't look away from the fire. "No, but I couldn't walk past you either." A long pause stretched between them. Then Olivia spoke again, her voice steadier this time. "Before the war, I was a teacher. My husband, he never came back. I didn't know where to go, I just kept walking." Logan nodded slowly. "You did what you had to, and now, so will I." Over the next few weeks, as battles raged in the distance and orders came and went like the wind, Olivia and her daughters stayed. With the unit, the men shared what little they had. Eloise learned to laugh again, playing with buttons and bullets as if they were toys. Margot followed Logan everywhere, calling him Capitan in her soft, shy voice. The war hadn't ended, but in that little corner of it, something else had begun, something fragile, yet powerful. Before they parted, Logan made a promise. "No matter what happens," he told Olivia, "you and the girls will be safe. I'll make sure of it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, took his hand, and pressed something into his palm, a small locket, dented but intact. "For luck," she whispered. Years later, long after the noise of war had faded, Logan would sit on his porch and open that locket, remembering that broken village, the quiet strength of a mother, and the promise made beneath falling ash. And in the stillness of his memory, he would smile, not because the world had changed, but because for a moment they had changed each other. The wind howled outside the tent, carrying with it the low rumble of distant shelling. Inside, the soft glow of a single lantern cast long shadows across the canvas walls. Logan sat quietly, his rifle beside him, boots still caked with mud. Across from him, Olivia held a blanket tightly around her shoulders, her eyes fixed on the flickering flame. Her daughters, Claire and Colette, slept side by side under a thick coat, their small chests rising and falling in sync. That night, something shifted. Olivia began to speak, not in panic or despair, but with the quiet rhythm of someone who had held a story in her heart for too long. "I met him just after the soldiers came," she said, her voice steady but low. "He was different, spoke French with a strange accent, said he was from Montreal. His name was Jake Miller." Logan didn't interrupt. He watched her carefully, listening as if the past were unfolding in real time. "I was 19. Foolish, maybe. But he was kind, and I hadn't known kindness in a long time. The world was falling apart, and somehow he made me feel like I could breathe again." She paused, fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. "When I told him I was expecting, I believed he'd stay. He promised he would. Said we'd find a way, even if it meant crossing the sea. But the next morning, he was gone, just like that." Olivia looked down at her daughters, her voice barely a whisper now. "I named them Claire and Colette. He never met them, never asked, never came back." Outside, the fire crackled softly. Logan clenched his jaw. It wasn't anger at her that filled his chest. It was something heavier, a quiet rage at the cruelty of war, at men who walked away when it mattered most, and at a world that left women like Olivia to carry the weight alone. "I tried not to hate him," she added, almost as if confessing a secret. "But some nights, when the girls cry in their sleep, it's hard." Logan nodded slowly. He didn't speak. Not yet. Words wouldn't fix what had been. Broken. But in that silence, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a quiet respect born from shared scars. He finally leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You didn't break," he said. "You kept them alive. That's more than most could do." Olivia met his eyes. For the first time, there was no fear in her gaze, only tired strength, only truth. And as the night stretched on, with thunder echoing in the distance and the scent of smoke on the wind, Logan knew this story, her story, would never leave him. Not because of the heartbreak, but because of the courage it took to keep going. The next morning brought a cold, silver light over the camp. Smoke still rose in thin columns from the hills beyond, but for once there was no gunfire. Logan knew this brief calm wouldn't last, so he acted quickly. He spoke to his commanding officer, pulled every thread he had, called in favors from men who owed him more than a drink. Within hours, a solution came, a small, guarded house tucked behind the British lines, run by a group of volunteers from France and the UK. It wasn't much, but it was clean, safe, and warm. And for now, that was everything. When he returned to tell Olivia, she was helping Colette wash her face with a cloth and a tin cup of lukewarm water. Claire clung to her side, yawning. Logan knelt beside them, his breath misting in the air. "I found a place," he said. "You and the girls can stay there. There's food, blankets, people who look after you." Olivia's hands froze. Her expression was guarded, unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" He looked her in the eyes. "Because you've done enough. You shouldn't have to fight anymore." She hesitated. "I don't want to depend on your pity." Logan's voice was calm, but his words carried weight. "It's not pity. It's the least I can do for someone who's never left my heart." Olivia went silent. Her lips parted as if she had something to say, but the words never came. She looked down at her daughters, at the dirt beneath their fingernails, at the bruises time had left on all of them. Then, slowly, she nodded. That afternoon, Logan walked with them to the edge of the camp. Soldiers nodded as they passed, some tipping their helmets, others simply watching in quiet respect. When they reached the transport vehicle, Olivia turned to him. "I don't know how to thank you." Logan gave a soft smile. "Just stay safe. That's all I need." As the truck pulled away, dust rising behind its wheels, Logan stood there alone, his hands still raised in farewell. He stayed until the vehicle disappeared beyond the trees, and for a long time after, even as the war thundered on around him, Logan carried a small peace in his chest, a moment of stillness, a whisper of something he thought he'd lost in the smoke and fire. The days bled together in the ruins of Caen. Smoke drifted endlessly across the rooftops, sirens screamed in the distance, and the earth trembled beneath the heavy tread of tanks. For most, it was just survival. But for Logan, something had changed. Amid the rubble and the ruin, he had found a reason to keep moving forward. Not a command, not a strategy, but a family. One that wasn't his, but had somehow become part of him. Whenever he could step away from his duties, he made his way through the broken streets to the small house tucked safely behind the British line. It wasn't much, just stone walls, 2 rooms, and a few volunteers who had seen more sorrow than most. But it was safe. And inside, there was a woman and 2 little girls who had reminded him what humanity felt like. That morning, the sun was barely rising over the horizon when Logan arrived. His uniform was dusted with ash, and a deep cut on his cheek spoke of how close the fighting had gotten. But he carried something in his arms, something carefully wrapped in cloth. He found Olivia in the back courtyard, her hair tied loosely, trying to scrub a basin of laundry with freezing water. Claire and Colette were playing nearby, chasing a small tin cup like it was a toy. The girls stopped when they saw him. Olivia looked up, her eyes tired, but softening at the sight of him. "You're early," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Logan smiled and held out the bundle. "Brought you something." Inside were 2 French children's books, pages yellowed but clean, and a simple leather-bound notebook with blank pages. "I remembered what you said," Logan explained, "about wanting to teach them to read. Figured you'd need something to get started." Olivia stared at the items for a moment, as if they didn't belong in a place like this. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the books. "I haven't held a real book in years," she whispered. "Not since before the occupation." Claire crept closer, tugging at her mother's skirt. "Maman, is that a storybook?" Logan knelt beside her. "It is, and it's waiting for someone brave enough to read it." Colette giggled, bouncing on her toes. "We're brave." Olivia pressed the books to her chest. Her smile wasn't wide, but it was real, and in that war-torn courtyard, it was more powerful than any explosion. It was the kind of smile that came from somewhere deep, where hope still lived, even if quietly. As the girls flipped through the pages together, Olivia and Logan sat on the stone steps. They didn't need to speak for a while. The quiet was enough, full of children's laughter, the rustling of pages, and the distant sound of artillery, like a thunderstorm in another world. Then Logan turned to her. "I've been thinking." She glanced at him, curious. "That sounds dangerous." He chuckled. "Maybe, but when this is all over, what would you say to going back to school, something like nursing? You already know how to take care of people. You've been doing it for years." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. "You think I could do that?" "I know you could," he said. "You've got more strength in you than half the men I've served with. It's time someone saw that." The idea hung in the air, warm and strange. Olivia didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at her daughters. 2 lives she had protected with everything she had. The thought of a future, of classrooms and clinics instead of hiding places and shelters, felt like a dream, too delicate to touch. But something inside her stirred. Later that evening, after Logan had gone, Olivia opened the notebook. She sat by candlelight, writing not lessons, but words that had been locked inside for too long now flowed freely across the pages. And though the world outside was still at war, in that quiet room, something had begun to heal. Because sometimes, all it takes to rebuild a life is one person who truly believes you can. The war had a way of digging up things you'd rather leave buried. No matter how far you ran or how much distance the front lines gave you, some ghosts had a way of catching up. And that day, Logan met one face-to-face. He'd returned to the camp late in the evening, his posture tense, jaw clenched, a kind of storm in his eyes that none of the men dared question. He walked past the fires without a word, dropped his gear in the corner of the tent, and sat down with his back to the canvas, hands resting in his lap like he was holding something invisible but heavy. Earlier that day, during a supply exchange near the American sector, Logan had heard a name mentioned in passing: Jake Miller. It stopped him cold. Jake Miller, a name that had lived in Olivia's voice, in the shadowed corners of her story, and in the quiet sadness of her daughter's eyes. The Canadian officer who vanished when it mattered most. A man who walked away from the kind of responsibility that turns boys into men. Logan asked around. It didn't take long. Jake wasn't hard to find. He was stationed just outside the town, sitting with a group of soldiers near a mess tent, laughing too loudly, a flask in his hand. His uniform was regulation, but the way he wore it was anything but. There was something careless in the way he leaned back, as if the war were just a game and the world still owed him something. Logan approached slowly, controlled, every step purposeful. The other men quieted when they saw him. Jake looked up, squinting as if trying to place a face from another life. Then he smirked. "Let me guess," Jake said, waving his flask lazily. "You're with the Brits, right? Come to borrow more of our gear?" Logan didn't answer. He stood still, watching him. "You're Jake Miller," Jake grinned wider. "Depends who's asking." Logan took a step closer. "I know Olivia. From the village near Caen, the one you left behind." For a brief second, something flickered in Jake's eyes. Recognition, maybe even guilt. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by a shrug and a cold laugh. "That girl?" he said. "You came all the way here for that?" Logan didn't speak. Jake leaned forward, his smile sharp, mocking. "Listen, she was just some fun in the middle of a war. What, you think I'm supposed to go play father to her little French brats? Don't be naive." The words were like a slap. Logan's fist curled at his sides. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. The urge to react, to make the man understand what he'd thrown away, pulsed through him like fire. But he didn't move. He didn't shout. He just stared. Until Jake, uncomfortable with the silence, stood up and walked away, muttering something under his breath. Logan remained still for a long time, breathing slowly, letting the weight of what he'd just witnessed settle into his bones. Then he turned and walked back to his camp. each step heavier than the last. That night, under the dim light of a lantern, he told Olivia everything. He didn't spare her the truth, not out of cruelty, but out of respect. She deserved to know. At first, she was silent. Her hands rested on her lap, fingers tightening around the edge of a folded blanket. Then tears welled in her eyes, not for Jake, not for what he was, but for Claire and Colette, for the answers she would one day have to give them. "They'll grow up without a father," she whispered, "and I'll never be able to change that." Logan lowered his gaze. "No, but they'll grow up knowing the truth, and knowing that you never stopped fighting for them." She wiped her eyes and looked at him, and for the first time Logan saw something new in her expression. Not sorrow, but strength. A quiet kind of strength, forged in grief and survival. "They deserve better than him," she said, "and I'll make sure they know that." Logan nodded, unsure what else to say. But deep inside, he made a silent vow. Those girls would never feel abandoned again. Not while he still had breath in his lungs. The morning sky over Caen was heavy with grey clouds, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Soldiers moved with purpose through the muddy camp, preparing for the next push north. Orders had come down the night before. Rouen was the next objective. The enemy had pulled back, but it wouldn't last. Everyone knew another storm was coming. Logan stood alone near the edge of the clearing, helmet in hand, staring at the horizon. The wind carried the sharp scent of rain and gunpowder, but his mind wasn't on the war. It was on the small stone house behind the lines, the quiet place where for a few fleeting weeks he'd remembered how to feel human. He visited Olivia and the girls for what he knew might be the last time. Claire ran into his arms the moment he appeared, and Colette peeked at him shyly from behind her mother's skirt. Olivia smiled, but something in her eyes told him she felt it too, that sense that the clock was running out. They sat together in the small garden behind the house. The roses had started blooming again, stubborn against the war-torn backdrop, their petals soft and defiant. Logan looked down at his hands, then reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. "There's a convoy leaving in 2 days," he said quietly. "Headed to the coast, then across the channel. Refugees, civilians, wounded, mostly women and children. It's going to London." Olivia blinked, unsure. "London? There's a shelter there. They help families rebuild. You'd have a place to stay, and a chance to start again. You talked about studying. Nursing school, remember?" She was silent, her fingers tracing the worn edge of her sleeve. "I've made arrangements," he continued. "They know you're incoming if you choose to go. You and the girls." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "And what about you?" Logan hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have to go north. Rouen needs men on the ground." She swallowed hard. "So I leave, and you go back to the fire." "If I survive," he said, managing a faint smile, "I'll find you, one way or another. And if you don't—" Logan paused. "Then at least I'll know you're safe, that I did one thing right." The silence between them was thick with unspoken things. The kind of silence that only exists between two people who have shared something too deep for words. Olivia turned to look at her daughters. Claire was humming softly to herself, arranging flower petals on the grass. Colette was busy trying to teach her doll how to sit up straight. They were still innocent, still untouched by the weight of the decision their mother had to make. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them and nodded. "I'll go." The next day, Logan returned with an officer's pass and final instructions. Olivia didn't speak much, neither did he. Some goodbyes are too sacred for words. When the truck arrived, Olivia lifted her daughters inside, one on each side. She turned to face Logan, And for a moment, time stood still. The noise of the camp faded. The war felt far away. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, letting his hand linger for a second too long. "You were the best part of this madness," he said. She took his hand and held it tightly. "Come back to us." Then, just like that, the truck pulled away. Logan stood there motionless, watching until the dust swallowed the last glimpse of her silhouette. He never forgot the way her eyes looked that day, full of fear, full of faith. And for the rest of his life, that moment would follow him like a shadow, the final page of a chapter he wished had never ended. Because war doesn't just take lives, it takes chances. It steals the futures we almost had. And Logan had let go of something precious, not out of weakness, but out of love. The war had finally quieted. After 6 long years of smoke and thunder, the guns had gone silent. Europe was rebuilding itself brick by brick, and men like Logan, who had marched through mud, fire, and memories they'd rather forget, were being sent home with discharge papers and empty duffel bags. But Logan didn't go home. Not yet. He stepped off the train at Paddington Station on a grey afternoon in late 1945, his coat buttoned tight against the chill of the London air. The city was a patchwork of old and new, rooftops still bearing the scars of bombings, streets filled with noise and life, children playing between sandbags left behind. He carried no map, just a name. A hospital on the south end of the city, one that cared for wounded veterans too broken to return to the lives they had before. That's where she would be. Logan's boots echoed on the marble floor as he stepped inside the building. The scent of antiseptic filled his lungs, sharp and sterile. Nurses moved swiftly through the hallways, their white uniforms fluttering behind them like flags of mercy. Voices murmured softly from rooms on either side. Men learning how to walk again, how to breathe without pain, how to live with the weight they'd brought back from the front. And then, just ahead, he saw her. Olivia stood at the far end of the corridor, reviewing a chart at the foot of a veteran's bed. Her dark hair was tied back neatly. A stethoscope hung loosely around her neck. Her posture was different now, taller, steadier, as if the war had carved out all the fear and left only purpose in its place. She hadn't seen him yet. Logan didn't call out. He didn't move. He just watched, letting the moment settle in his chest like a familiar song played after years of silence. Then a small voice broke the quiet. "Logan?" He turned to see Claire, no longer a little girl, but still young, eyes wide with wonder. Her coat sleeves were too short, her cheeks red from the cold, but she looked stronger somehow, more certain. She dropped her books and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Mama talks about you all the time," she said into his coat. "She said you were the bravest person she ever met." Logan knelt down, gently hugging her back. "I missed you," he whispered. "All of you." Colette appeared a moment later, peeking shyly from behind a nurse's skirt. She gave him a small smile, the same one he remembered from the garden behind the safe house in Caen. By the time Olivia turned around and saw them together, her hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears instantly, the chart in her hands slipping unnoticed to the floor. She took a step forward, uncertain, as if he might vanish again like a dream disturbed too soon. Logan rose slowly and walked to her, never breaking eye contact. "I told you I'd come back," he said softly. Olivia couldn't speak. She simply nodded, the tears slipping freely down her cheeks now. There were no dramatic embraces, no sweeping declarations, just two people standing in a quiet hospital corridor, finally free from the chaos that had nearly destroyed them both. Later they sat outside in the hospital courtyard as the first snow of winter began to fall. The girls played nearby, throwing flakes into the air, laughing like they'd never known war. Logan reached into his coat and pulled out a worn notebook, the same one he'd given Olivia months before. Inside were pages, filled with lessons, drawings, even small pressed flowers from the garden in Caen. "I read every page," he said. "Every time I felt like I wouldn't make it, I read your words." Olivia placed her hand gently over his. "Then you already know what I wanted to tell you." That night, under the soft glow of a London winter sky, Logan understood something he never had before. War had stolen many things from him: brothers, sleep, pieces of his soul. But it had given him something too: a reason to hope. Second chance. And sometimes, in the quiet aftermath of history, that's all a soldier needs to begin again. Peace had returned, but not everyone knew what to do with it. For men like Logan, who had lived so long with the sound of gunfire in their ears, silence felt unnatural. The war had ended, yes, but its echoes lingered in the stiffness of his shoulder, in the way he flinched at sudden sounds, in the memories that surfaced without warning. Yet somehow, in that fragile silence, something new began to grow. London had become a different city by 1946. Rebuilding was slow but steady. Parks were reopening. Cafes buzzed with cautious joy, and the smell of bread returned to the air. Olivia continued her work at the Veterans Hospital, now leading a small program to assist war orphans. Her strength hadn't faded. In fact, it had deepened, matured. She became a pillar for many who had lost everything, a quiet force that never demanded attention but always earned respect. Logan, discharged with honors, had found his new place too. He had been asked to stay on as a firearms instructor at a military training center just outside the city. It wasn't combat, but it was purpose. It gave him a rhythm again. And every evening, without fail, he returned to the small brick house he now shared with Olivia, Claire, and Colette. The girls had grown fast. Claire, with her curious questions and ever-present notebooks, had become a sharp student. Colette, quieter but fiercely brave, followed. Logan like a shadow when he was home, often pretending to be his assistant during cleaning drills, despite being only 7. They weren't blood, but they were his. Their life wasn't perfect. Logan still woke some nights in a cold sweat, and Olivia carried the kind of sorrow that never fully leaves. But their days were filled with small joys, shared meals, books read aloud in the living room, the warm weight of sleepy children against tired shoulders, and laughter, so much laughter. One spring afternoon, Logan borrowed a friend's car and drove them all into the countryside. The air smelled of earth and wildflowers, and for once, everything felt far away. No war, no loss, just open fields and a blue sky that stretched forever. They stopped by an old oak tree, its branches heavy with new leaves. Olivia laid out a blanket while the girls chased each other through the grass, giggling as they tried to catch butterflies with empty jars. They ate sandwiches, told stories, and let the sun warm their faces. It was simple, beautifully, painfully simple. After lunch, Olivia sat beneath the tree, resting with her back against the trunk. Logan watched her for a long moment, then stood up slowly. His heart pounded, not like it did in battle, but like it had the first time he saw her smile. He reached into his pocket. "Can I steal you for a second?" he asked. She smiled, brushing crumbs from her skirt, and stood to face him. Logan took her hand and led her a few steps away, where the ground was soft and covered with tiny white flowers. Then he dropped to one knee. Olivia froze. Logan looked up at her, eyes clear and steady. "I've fought through things I don't even know how to name. I've lost people I loved, and I've questioned everything I ever believed in. But through all of it, you kept me grounded. You brought me back." He paused, swallowing the emotion rising in his throat. "You saved me, Olivia. And you didn't need a rifle or a uniform to do it. Tears filled her eyes before he even reached for the ring. "So," he continued, voice softer now, "will you let me be part of your peace, the same way you were part of my war?" She didn't say anything, not at first. Instead, Olivia fell to her knees in front of him, tears slipping down her cheeks, and whispered one word as she held his face between her hands. "Yes." Under that solitary tree, as wildflowers bent in the wind and children laughed in the distance, they sealed a promise far stronger than any forged in the battlefield. A promise of healing, of choosing one another again and again, even in the quiet days after the storm. Years passed like pages in a well-worn book, quiet, steady, full of life between the lines. The war was long over, but in Logan's eyes, you could still see the weight of it, not in bitterness or fear, but in the quiet way he folded blankets at night, in how he scanned a room without thinking, in the way he held his family a little tighter every morning. Olivia stood in the garden, her hand resting gently on her growing belly, the sound of birdsong dancing in the breeze. Claire and Colette, now young women with dreams of their own, laughed on the porch with Logan, teasing him about something he said. They called him Papa, like they had done so naturally for years. It wasn't just a name, it was who he had become, a father, a husband, a man who had chosen love in a world that had once taught him only to survive. Logan had left the army some time ago, honored with medals that sat quietly in a drawer he rarely opened. He never boasted, never told his daughters about the day he faced fire or the night he carried a wounded friend across a frozen field. What he spoke of was different. The time he learned to bake bread during a ceasefire, the song Olivia used to hum in the safe house, the way Colette once fell asleep in his arms with a button clutched in her hand. He still had his battles, nights where sleep slipped away, shadows that clung to the corners of his dreams. But now there was peace too, the kind built slowly with laughter, shared meals and forgiveness, the kind found in a child's giggle or the rustle of pages from a bedtime story. Their story, the sharpshooter and the forgotten mother, became something of a legend among the veterans, not because of heroic charges or battlefield triumphs, but because they reminded others of something deeper, that even in the darkest corners of history, humanity can survive. And sometimes, love is the most defiant act of all. Olivia gave birth in the spring, a boy with his father's quiet eyes and his mother's steady spirit. They named him Thomas, after no general or king, but simply because the name felt full of warmth. Logan often took him into the garden at sunset. He'd sit with the baby in his arms, listening to the wind move through the trees, watching the sky shift from gold to deep blue. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he didn't. But always, there was gratitude in his silence, because he had lived to see what so many hadn't, because he had kept a promise, because in a world that tried to tear people apart, he had helped build something whole. Did you already know this story? What would you have done in Logan's place? What other stories about soldiers and veterans should be told? These aren't just tales from the past, they're reminders of what it means to be human, of the sacrifices made, the hearts broken and mended, the families rebuilt from ash and hope. This story deserves to be remembered. Let the image stay with you, a man once hardened by war, now holding his newborn son under a sky no longer filled with fire, but with stars. If this story moved you, don't let it be forgotten. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this one, stories of courage, of quiet heroes, of love that outlasts even the longest war. We'll see you in the next one. And until then, remember, even the smallest acts of kindness can echo louder than any gunshot.